And it's terrifying. The thought that 10.93% of women are experiencing one of these serious adverse events after taking the pill. Any other drug that had an adverse event rate like that would be pulled off the market, but not mifepristone, because the left thinks women need abortion above all else.
Hi again, everybody. Welcome to another episode of The Narrative. Mike Andrews, Aaron Bear with you today. And Aaron, there are weeks when we need to scour the news trying to find something to talk about. And there are other weeks where we can just talk about a day's worth of press releases from CCB. And that is where we're at today, because what a day yesterday was.
Yeah, and let me just say, too, listen, guys, we hear you. We send out a lot of emails, okay? We know we're trying to figure out the best way to synthesize all of this stuff down. We literally just had our retreat with Mike and all the leadership team, and we were talking through it on, all right, we are now sending, because we're doing more than we ever have, right? I mean, it's a good problem to have. But, you know, we had this whole conversation on Tuesday at our leadership team retreat on, yeah, we got to start figuring out other ways to communicate these things and all that. And yeah, we're hearing the feedback that it's a lot of communications. And then literally the next day, it's like, so here's 3 things we're sending today.
And what was so funny, this is a little bit how the sausage is made here, but we had a conversation on Monday, like, okay, here's our rhythm, here's what we know what's coming, we can kind of spread these out throughout the week, and then, nope.
No, here's 3 things that have to go down.
Here's 4 emails before 11 a.m. on Wednesday, but they were also
But it's good. Like, I promise, like, we're only trying to do, like, meaty things like, you should know this just happened, this, like, and some of the stuff we're going to talk about today, like, it is, like, core CCB mission of, you know, why do people support us? Why do people come around us? Is, you know, sign up for our emails, is... There's so much stuff that happens in government that affects you and matters for how you vote. You know, like we don't want voters that just, you know, come election day try to turn on and see what's going on. We want to stay engaged and at least baseline informed. And so that's our job, is to help Christians especially do that. And yeah, like you said, there's some days where it's like, there's nothing we can do about this.
Yeah, it's just got to be what it is.
Yeah. But we're trying to figure it out. I promise you.
We are working on it. As Aaron said, we hear you. Stay tuned. We'll try and figure it out.
Yep.
And if we don't, we're just going to keep sending emails, because you got to know.
You have to know it. Yeah. We're really trying to be discerning about this. Is one you got to know. Yeah.
Well, one of the things that we wanted to email folks about yesterday is you had not a first-time experience by any means, but the unique experience of being at the Supreme Court yesterday and speaking at a rally around the Drummond case, which we talked a little bit about a few weeks ago when Troy was on the podcast, and school choice was a big factor in that, in the way that I think it's in Oklahoma, where there were a Christian charter school that wasn't being given the same privileges as other charter schools in the state. So tell us a little bit about the experience and some of your remarks and just the overall feeling in D.C. around that case.
Yeah, you know, this is one of these cases that subtly could fundamentally transform education in a great way in America today. And it has massive implications both for religious freedom and massive implications for school choice. And so let me just sort of level set what it is real quickly here. So in Oklahoma, just like in Ohio, they have charter schools, right? Charter schools are different than private schools because they are technically public schools, right? But they are operated by a private entity. Right, so they're regulated the same as a public school in terms of their testing requirements, safety requirements. You know, they have to accept all kids, all of that kind of stuff, right? But instead of having a huge sort of bureaucracy over the top of it in terms of mandating all of the other stuff that goes along with it, a private entity can run the school. Again, they still have to meet all of the public requirements, but really what it allows for a lot, where you see a lot of charter schools really make a name for themselves, are in creating custom learning environments. So a virtual, sort of an online school, that's where a lot of folks interact with charter schools. Or maybe it's a STEM school, or maybe it's an arts school, or those types of things, right? They make various emphasis. Well, in in Oklahoma, for the first time ever, we had a school say, hey, we are going to start this private entity that's going to run the school is going to be St. Isidore Virtual Catholic School, right? Virtual charter school, rather. And they were going to be a Catholic charter school. So the underlying operator was going to be Catholic. They were going to integrate Catholic theology, Catholic ideas into it, but they were going to be a public school. So you still accept everyone, but just like a STEM school is going to emphasize, science and technology and math and things like that, these guys were going to have an additional emphasis over Christianity, Catholicism, that kind of thing. First of its kind. I can understand folks say, whoa, there's some issues here, this separation of church and state, all that kind of nonsense that folks say. But it's kind of a new concept. So the Oklahoma Charter School Board voted to approve them. And then the Attorney General said, no, you can't approve them. This is a violation of the separation of church and state. Went all the way up to, it's at the Supreme Court now. So why do we believe that this St. Isidore should be allowed to exist, and any religious entity wants to run a charter school should be able to do so? It really comes in, and this was my first remarks yesterday at the rally, which again is just still a really an amazing thing that we get to do as Americans is stand outside of the highest court, the most powerful court, and speak freely about these things and have open debate with people who disagree with us. It's something that makes America special, but I'm trying not to get too distracted there. The fundamental question is, if this organizing entity was, instead of being St. Isidore Virtual Academy, they were the Excellence Virtual Academy or the Innovation Virtual Academy, would they have been denied, right? If it wasn't for their faith, would they be able to access this program, right? And the answer, the undisputed facts of the case are, no, they would not have been denied if they were anything else, right? So fundamentally, what the state of Oklahoma has done in this situation is they have said there are secular views which are preeminent, and they are the views that get special protections and special access, and there are religious views that are secondary and they get denied certain access. That is a religious test that is fundamentally in violation of the First Amendment. You cannot show preference in that way. This is one of the biggest things that I see even Christians get wrong today, is that there's this sort of super secular worldview that gets the protection that is the standard view of America and the standard view of the Constitution, and then there's all these other religious views. That's fundamentally not the case. I mean, that's again, I know this is a little bit trite, but that cannot be what the First Amendment meant when you have that when the writers of the Constitution talked about we have certain rights endowed by our Creator, right? When you saw prayers starting the constitutional conventions and things like that, very clearly they could not have thought that that's what the First Amendment meant, is that there's secular views and that's the preeminent view, and then everything religious has to, that can't function that way. So that's why this is a very important First Amendment case, but it's also a very important school choice case, because the number one folks that are bringing innovation into the education space are Christians. I think CCV and our Ohio Christian Education Network and United States Christian Education Network are a big example of that. And if we can open this door to allowing Christians to get into the charter school space as well, that would be phenomenal. Now, again, that's a very different conversation than private schools and the voucher programs and ESA programs that are all over the country, because private schools are able to say, hey, you can only come here if you ascribe to our faith. If you're a religious charter school, you've got to accept everybody, right? But they are choosing to come to you and choosing to get that type of education. So you'd be choosing to come to get a Christian education here. Now, before somebody else says, oh my gosh, but what if somebody goes and starts an LGBT charter school? Well, maybe that could happen, but I would say it's most likely not going to happen because we already have those. Those are called public schools.
Boom,
Sorry.
roasted.
Yeah, boom, roasted. Anyway, there's it.
Well, a couple of thoughts come to mind. Number one, Christians were largely behind the early public school movement in America, so y'all messed that up.
Right.
And we're trying
You're missing the case here.
And it seems also that the Supreme Court has ruled on not exactly the same thing. They wouldn't pick up a case if it was in line with something that they've already ruled on, but we've seen, what was it, the Trinity case?
The Trinity
Missouri,
Lutheran case.
where you're treating a religiously based organization differently than you would treat a secular case. And so there's some overlap in ways that they've ruled before with this case.
No, that Trinity Lutheran is a great example for those who remember that case. This was a Christian preschool that the state of Missouri had a program where you could apply for rubberized tires for your playground, right? And Trinity Lutheran submitted an application. They were a top, it was like the top 15 applicants were going to get it. They were a top 5 applicant in terms of meeting the generally applied requirements in terms of does your space meet the facilities? Is it a large enough space? Is it too large of a space? Did you, honestly, do you have your stuff together? All of the things of like, are you actually going to use this for playground? And they were rated, I think, a top 5 applicant. And then the state of Missouri said, no, because you're Christian, because you're religious, you can't get it, right? And that is, one of my favorite, odious to the Constitution. That is not allowed under the First Amendment. And so, we should get a decision in this case by the end of June. And again, it's a big deal.
Well, the one bit of news that I think caught us off guard most of all, because we were, off site,
right? Yeah,
barely had cell phone service, and got a note that there was a ruling on HB 68, the SAFE Act, which we had mentioned a few weeks ago, had been stayed due to a lower court ruling and a challenge brought by the ACLU. And we got our ABC lesson this morning. This is my branding for you, Aaron. That's the Aaron Bear Civics lesson for the team as you kind of walked us through what was going on with this. The broad scope is that great news, but still 4-3 was confusing.
Surprising. Yeah, confusing. That's a good word for it. So the baseline on this, House Bill 68, the SAFE Act, we passed it, went into effect after we overrode the governor's veto, and it was around January 2024. The ACLU brought a lawsuit against it in state court, not federal court, but in state court. They brought it in Franklin County court. Shocker of shockers, actually, our side won, right? In that case. Then the ACLU appealed to the 10th District Court of Appeals, and our side lost in that, right? And by our side, I mean, Dave Yost is the one arguing on behalf of the state, and Elliot Geiser, our Solicitor General. They've been doing a phenomenal job. Technically, what the 10th District did was they only blocked the ban on puberty blockers and hormone therapy from going into effect. And so Dave Yost appealed immediately up to the Supreme Court to say, hey, you need to overturn this block while the trial goes on, right? So this is just a question of, hey, is the law going to be allowed to be in effect while a full trial on the merits proceeds? And thankfully, this Ohio Supreme Court said, yep, we're going to overturn stay the 10th District Court's decision. So the full SAFE Act is back in effect while the full trial goes on. This could take 18 months to 2 years, right? So that's good for at least the next 18 months to 2 years. These procedures will be blocked. We still feel confident we're going to win. I really want to say how grateful we are that Justice Pat DeWine, Justice Joe Dieters, Justice Megan Shanahan, and Justice Dan Hawkins voted to overturn the 10th District Court and allow this law to go in effect. But to your point, Mike, we were quite frankly shocked that it was 4-3, because I think most folks would look at the Ohio Supreme Court and say there's a 6-1 conservative majority on the Supreme Court. And what you had was Chief Justice Sharon Kennedy, Justice Pat Fisher, and then Democrat Justice Jennifer Brunner, who we figured would vote against this, vote to allow the stay, allow the law to be blocked ongoing. And that's really surprising that those justices would do that. Now, what also frustrated me about this, and this is just generally one of my frustrations with the Ohio Supreme Court, a lot of times, we're used to seeing opinions and dissents and things like that, but that's when a case is finally decided, right? That's the last thing you get. The judges explain their decisions. Well, in this case, we didn't get an explanation. We just got a ruling that came out with the four justices that said, yep, we're going to block this, and the three justices that says, the four justices said, yes, we're going to allow this law to go into effect, and the three justices says, no, we think the law should remain blocked while the trial goes forward. And so I put out a statement yesterday. Obviously, CCV put out a statement because these are justices that the Ohio people elected. Right. So to our earlier conversation, Mike, this is our obligation to let people know, hey, here's how the people you elected voted. Right. We do this regularly at CCV.
Yeah. And the Supreme Court races were a big part of our voter guide last year.
Huge part.
Like, don't forget about this because it's really important.
It matters a lot. Right. And these same justices soon are going to be deciding some abortion amendment cases and school choice cases. And so people need to understand what they're doing so that when these folks are going to be out on the campaign trail again, you can talk to them about why did you do this? And it's really hard to know why they do this when they don't tell you. Their names just show up on one side of the vote or another. And so I frankly was very frustrated. That was my post on X yesterday, hey, this is great. The law's back in effect. Super grateful for Justice DeWine, Justice Dieters, Justice Shanahan, and Justice Hawkins. But for the life of me, I can't understand, especially why Chief Justice Kennedy and Justice Fisher would vote in a way that would allow kids to continue to be sterilized. And I think that's a legitimate question they should be asked when they're out across the state. Justices aren't above the voters, right? The voters are still the sort of the supreme authorities in our state. My understanding is Justice Kennedy at least has some explanation for it. I don't think it's a very good one. I'll let her, if she decides she wants to explain to voters why she did what she did, I think she should, because we deserve to know that why a justice would think it's okay for kids to be sterilized or act in that, or at least rule in such a way that would allow that to go on. And it's this is there are few things as important as this issue right now when you understand how rampant these procedures were all over the state and how important it is for us to protect our children today.
And the process that you outlined there as part of that is important for the next story that we want to talk about, which is the friend of the court brief, the amicus brief that CCV filed in the HB 68 case. So tell our listeners a little bit about that, Aaron.
Yeah, this was a big one and a pretty cool one too. Yeah,
Yeah, it was actually hard to capture what it actually meant in a quick news release, but that's why I'm grateful we have a little longer format here that we can talk about it.
For sure. So the 10th District Court was very strategic in how they struck down or how they blocked a part of the SAFE Act, right? One, they didn't touch surgeries. They didn't touch boys and girls sports. So they were very politically minded that those things are not popular. And they tried to parse out the puberty blockers and hormone therapies from especially the surgeries, which again is logically nonsensical, but okay. And what they did in particular, voters in Ohio might remember in 2012, following the passage of Obamacare, there was what was called a healthcare freedom amendment that was passed. And it really was in response, like I mentioned, to Obamacare to say, hey, people should be free to get access insurance that they want and not be forced to get insurance they don't want, things like that. And it was backed by a lot of very conservative groups. Former Reagan Attorney General Ed Meese was one of the main advocates for this, not just in Ohio, but nationwide and other states to pass. And they actually, the court relied upon the Healthcare Freedom Amendment. So this conservative-backed amendment, and used what they would call, they said, hey, we want to be textualists, we want to be originalists, constitutionalists, right? All buzzwords. Yeah, I'm sure everybody who hears those words, if you're a good conservative, you perk up. Yeah, that's right, that's us. They used all of this language to try to, pressure the court, the Supreme Court, because they're very much aware that there's a 6-1 majority on the Supreme Court. So they used all of these arguments, try to box the Supreme Court, saying, well, hey, you believe in healthcare freedom, right? You believe in textualism and originalism, right? Then you have to rule with us. This is what the voters said. There's very clear problems with that. One of which is, if you're going to read the Healthcare Freedom Amendment to say that people should be allowed to get any medical procedure, whatever they want, at any time, we couldn't ban drugs at that point, right? Like if somebody says, I need to take fentanyl to deal with my mental health, who is the government to say no to that, right? It's really an absurd argument. But if you're also got to say, this is what they were really trying to do is, hey, this is what they even went so far as to quote Ed Meese. They cited Ed Meese in their brief to say, see, even Ed Meese would say that this is unconstitutional, or at least suggest that is what they were kind of getting at. So the good news is Ed Meese is still around, right? He's still with us. And by the grace of God, we got in contact with Mr. Meese. He's retired now and all these types of things. And we wrote a brief and asked him, hey, could we submit this on your behalf, saying this is not what I meant, right? This is bad textualism and originalism. And Ed Meese is kind of one of the fathers of textualism and originalism, along with Antonin Scalia and others. But also, this is not what I meant in this Politico article that you're quoting me from 2012, which, as an aside, one of my all-time great, I've got to get off this call, was I was talking to a friend, and Ed Meese called me on my cell, and I'd be like, hey, I'm sorry, I have to call you back. Ed Meese is calling me. That was pretty fun.
Not the name drop, right?
Not the name drop. Right?
Kind of a big deal.
It's kind of a big deal. But we submitted a brief on Mr. Meese's behalf, basically debunking all of that, which was really great. Corinne Vidalis on our team worked on it with us. And just that I think is going to help really provide clarity to the Supreme Court. And this is where groups like CCV really matter in these cases, because you have Dave Yost, who's bringing in all the arguments, the official arguments from the court to the court. But what the left has done for years is they bring in all these, like you mentioned, friend of the court briefs, these outside groups to file briefs in these cases, try to bully and pressure the court in. And the right typically we don't get involved in that, right? And I said this to our board and to the team. Like, if we weren't here, this wouldn't happen, because these briefs also aren't cheap to write and file. And so, thank you to everyone who supports CCV, supports us. By the grace of God, we're in position then to fight these fights and see these fights to the end, right? It's not just enough to vote to get the people elected, or even just to get the law passed. Then you got to stay in the game to make sure it gets upheld and gets enforced. That's why we have this building on Cap Square, and that's why we do what we do here.
Yeah, and quick plug, ccv.org/donate.
Yeah,
if you want to key.
Oh yeah, I mean, we spent over $10,000 on briefs and other legal research in this case, and again, that's all private donor support. That the state has their taxpayer dollars they use. We got to do this all with the $12 widow's mite checks we get, and larger as well.
Yeah, and if you want to donate to keep David Mahan off the podcast, by all means, just make a note in
That's right,
your donation.
exactly.
And we'll make sure that
Designate
happens.
that. Yeah,
We'll send them on some remote corner of the state with your donation.
Send them back out to Nebraska again, like we did before. So yeah.
Well, that's been a full docket of news, and the crazy thing is we haven't even touched on the biggest story
one.
of the week. But we did that intentionally. We saved it for the interview portion so we could have a full close to 30 minutes to talk about this new bombshell abortion pill report with Jamie Hall from the Ethics and Public Policy Center. This was staggering
It's
when
the
we looked at
biggest
it.
pro-life news since Dobbs. I mean, and it's just getting started.
Yeah, and there's no other. We don't need to say anything else except that to tee up the interview. Jamie Hall from the Ethics and Public Policy Center coming up next on The Narrative. Hey, Narrative listeners. You know, Christians in the marketplace today face more unique and challenging threats than ever before. Businesses are following woke capitalism, chambers of commerce are beholden to social justice, and secular activists are chipping away Christians' First Amendment rights. As Ohio's only Christian Chamber of Commerce, the Christian Business Partnership stands in the gap to advocate for, to educate, and to celebrate Christian business owners. Joining the partnership also allows businesses to provide their employees with healthcare insurance, workers' compensation, and exclusive banking and educational discounts. To find out more and to join, go to cbpohio.org. That's cbpohio.org. We are back on The Narrative. Mike Andrews, Aaron Bear, and we're joined now by Jamie Hall from the Ethics and Public Policy Center, where he is the Director of Data Analysis and a Fellow in the Life and Family Initiative. He began his career in the George W. Bush administration, where he served with the CIA and other agencies. He was born and raised in Kentucky and currently resides in Virginia with his wife and their 4 children. And we're excited to talk to you today, Jamie, about a new report that you've authored around the abortion pill and some of the misleading claims, to say the least, that are out there about it. So thanks for the time and helping us break this down today.
Thank you for inviting me onto your show. I really appreciate the opportunity to share this information. It's just incredible what's happening to these women.
Yeah, and I think the place that we just need to start is some of the claims made around the abortion pill are that it's allegedly safe and effective. And we know that that is completely and totally not true, because when it is effective, it's not safe for the baby. Mm-hmm. But certainly they're making that claim from the standpoint of the mother. But your report that Ethics and Public Policy Center just put out shows that it's not even safe for the mother, because there are a lot of severe adverse health effects that are documented when women take this. So kind of walk us through some of that high level detail and what you found as you looked into this issue.
Sure. So we found that 1 in 10 women who take the abortion pill will experience a serious adverse event. Well, what does that mean? It's something like infection, which could lead to sepsis, hemorrhaging, which could eventually require a blood transfusion. About half of the women who experience one of these serious adverse events will find themselves in the ER or even hospitalized as a result of that. So we're not talking about just like nausea and vomiting, some cramps, things like that. We're talking about really serious medical events that require attention.
So, Jamie, I think the thing about this report right now that can't be missed, right? There's a lot of, in the pro-life world, we literally have endless websites that are coming out with stories that, like, I love them, Life News, LifeSite News, all that kind of stuff. This report is different. I like the way David B. Wright said the other day that this is the most significant news and victory, I'd say, by exposing this for the pro-life movement since Dobbs, right? That, for a lot of us, as my wife, who volunteers at a pregnancy center, David Mahan, our policy director, she runs a pregnancy center. Anybody who's worked in the pregnancy center space has seen for years that women who take the abortion pill very often have serious adverse events, right? They end up in the hospital for various issues. Now we have the data to show it, right? Now we have the real life evidence to show it. And the data we have on this, I think, is what really sets this report apart. It's not just, like you said, not just that, the FDA label says, less than 0.5% of women who take the pill have serious adverse events. It's 1 in 10. Our data, the data that's in this report, your data, is actually better than anything the FDA had when they came up with that claim. Can you just explain where this data came from and why this data is actually a more reliable picture of the actual adverse events from the abortion pill, the actual risk of the abortion pill, compared to what the FDA came up with that number with before?
Sure. We have data on all abortions that were paid for through insurance in the United States from 2017 to 2023. This is 865,727 abortions. By contrast, the FDA, when they're discussing the safety of mifepristone, the abortion pill, they're using data for less than 31,000 women. So we have 28 times as much data as the FDA has on the safety of mifepristone. We're looking at real women who are taking the pill under the conditions, receiving the care that actual women receive when they take this pill here in the U.S. today, whereas the FDA was looking at clinical trials where the doctors were monitoring the women closely throughout, and they were going to receive much higher quality care, quicker interventions if anything started to go wrong. That's not what women get today when they actually take the pill in real life. So we have much, much more reliable data on what any woman who's actually considering taking the abortion pill today could expect along the way. And it's terrifying. The thought that 10.93% of women are experiencing one of these serious adverse events after taking the pill. Any other drug that had an adverse event rate like that would be pulled off the market, but not mifepristone, because the left thinks women need abortion above all else.
And just for context, so people understand, there's a few things I want to help clarify here. One, this is the abortion pill, different than what most folks would think of as contraception, which is the pill that women take sort of daily to prevent pregnancy. Also different from what's called the morning after pill, which is women can take immediately following sex to try to stop pregnancy. Oftentimes in both of those situations, abortions can be caused by those pills, but not always. This is the two-drug regimen that Planned Parenthood uses. According to the Ohio 2023 abortion report, this pill was used in 44%, so over 9,000 abortions in Ohio in 2023. That number has increased dramatically over the last few years, even since that, or over the last 2 years since 2023. And the way this pill works is it's a two-pill regimen. You have mifepristone, which allegedly how it's supposed to work is it basically starves the child, so it blocks the child from getting progesterone, which is nutrition in the womb. And then the second pill they take is called misoprostol, which induces labor. And so this is specifically over mifepristone. Now, Jamie, I want to go back to the data you were talking about. So this was, you mentioned it was about 860,000 women that was in this study. This database covered 330 million Americans over the 7-year span. I'm sure for a lot of our good conservative listeners here, that's pretty creepy that this data is out there. What is this data? Was this like data that was leaked somewhere? Where did this data come from, and how is this data typically used?
This is called de-identified data. So we don't know exactly who any of these people were. We just have an identifier so that we can track the same person over time as, in this case, the woman receives care after the abortion for whatever complications she might experience. But in general, this data is used for all sorts of health research, both from academics as well as from industry. Insurance companies will use this to help them decide what they should be covering, what their pricing should be. This is a multi-billion-dollar industry trading on people's healthcare data, but it has to be done in a way that's compliant with HIPAA. So there are 18 specific items that are considered restricted under HIPAA. That information has to be removed from the data before it's shared. But after that's shared, we're able to look at every diagnosis, every procedure, any treatment that anyone's receiving at any healthcare provider covered by their insurance in the United States. It's just that in this case, we're focused on abortion and the care that women receive in the 45 days after the abortion.
So this might be getting into the weeds a little bit too much, but is that just based on like medical coding and things like that that are available in medical records, and you can
Yes.
kind of
Yes,
cross-identify what's an abortion and what are these adverse reactions?
yes. So we're able to identify the abortions within the data set because they have the appropriate medical codes for an abortion. Usually there's one particular code that's used most of the time that covers the entire visit associated with the abortion at the doctor's office. But then in other cases, actually some of the insurance companies don't really want it to be so easy for people to identify that they're paying for abortion. So they on the website of the manufacturer of the abortion pill, Danco Laboratories, if you look hard enough, you can find a document that says, hey, providers, if you want to get this covered by insurance, here's how you need to fill it out and report it for our purposes. We took that information for what codes they were using in these specific situations for these specific insurers in certain states and said, okay, we're going to include those as well. So they were in some sense trying to hide it, but we were able to find those too.
Jamie, I just want to ask because you were, you were the lead researcher on this. What was that moment like, just personally, when you're going through this and you see, and sorting through 330 million, patient data points and all of that. When you came across the 11% number, what was that moment like for you personally looking at all of this? And have you ever seen anything like that in all your data analysis?
Oh man, I've looked at so many different large data sets over the course of my career. I mean, you mentioned I worked at the CIA, right? I can't really talk a whole lot about that, but
why not?
Yeah, we want to have you back just to talk about all that. Like, what's the code, man? No, anyway.
But yeah, we had access to data too. This is one of the most astonishing things that I've ever seen. To go into looking at a data set where the FDA is saying that you're going to have less than 0.5% serious adverse events, and then to actually start looking, code by code, category by category, and seeing what's really happening to these women. It's terrifying. It's tragic. It's hard to believe that anybody approved this. But they did, and it didn't get there like right away, right? When this drug was first approved in 2000 under the Clinton administration, there were much stronger safeguards in effect to try to protect women from these sorts of adverse events, right? They had to have at least 3 doctor visits. They had to receive the pill in person from the doctor, take it there in the office, make sure there weren't any immediate complications. Then when they took the second pill, 2 or 3 days later, they were at the doctor again to make sure everything was okay. Then 2 weeks later, they're checking again to make sure that there aren't any fetal parts remaining inside the woman's body, that there aren't any other issues, right? Well, Clinton wanted abortion to be safe, legal, and rare, and we can definitely disagree on whether it should be illegal or not. But as far as safety, that administration, they seemed to be making a legitimate effort to keep the woman safe with the protocols that they had in place in 2000. But then since then, under the Obama administration and then under the Biden administration, all these safety protocols have been just chipped away at to the point where now it's possible for a woman to go online, fill out a form, basically claiming that she's healthy, get the pill in the mail, take the drug at home. Hopefully everything turns out okay, because if not, man, who's taking care of her? Who's she going to call? Well, she's going to end up at the emergency room in the hospital because 10% of the time things aren't turning out okay, right? This is just terrible for these women. But we didn't get there right away in 2000 when this was approved. This has been a long process, gradually chipping away at the safety protocols to where we end up in this just terrible situation that we have here today.
And My understanding, we've watched, I've watched the sort of chipping away at these protocols over the years by the Obama and Biden administration. And I think one of the aspects of it too was that that actual process wasn't done by the normal. Again, we've seen this with all things abortion for decades now. Is that there's sort of standard, sort of legal precedent and things that the way things work. There's standard medical precedents for the way things work, and then there's abortion, and it tends to get its own rules and processes. Honestly, the only other example that comes close to it is the transgender stuff. And by the grace of God, that's getting rectified relatively quickly, even though there's still been a lot of devastation that's come from that. Can you just talk a little bit, speak into a little bit of typically what it takes for the FDA to change a change a regulation, change a process, and how Obama and Biden just sort of waved their hands. I believe Biden even used some COVID powers to allow this drug to be proliferated to even more. But what was that like?
Sure. So you mentioned COVID, right? That was what allowed them to remove the requirement for any in-person doctor visit, because during COVID, folks weren't going to the doctor for much of anything, and they got a court initially to say that abortion was so important, and access to abortion was so important that they couldn't even require the one doctor visit that Obama had required in order to receive the pill. So they got that thrown out in court initially, even when the COVID emergency ended, and it was restored very, very briefly, that there would be the in-person requirement. The Biden administration quickly moved to change that and to get it in place. Since 2023, officially, there has been no requirement for any in-person doctor visit in order to receive the abortion pill.
I'm curious, Jamie. The methodology here seems really solid. When you're looking at medical code specifically, it's easy to see cause and effect, or where there's that initial abortion and the follow-up visit. So what's the reaction been like from opponents? Like, where are they trying to pick holes in this report that you've seen here in the early going?
Well, some of them just didn't bother to read it, so they're claiming.
Well, of course not. Reading is hard. Can we give them a break?
So they're claiming things like we counted every time that a woman showed up at the ER, even if she got hit by a bus or something like that. I mean, like, no, we say right there in the report that we're only counting ER visits that were related to the abortion. We're looking for medical diagnosis and procedure codes in the insurance data showing that she's actually there for complications related to the abortion. But if you don't bother to read, it's really easy to just say, oh, well, of course they're overcounting. Well, no, we're not. There's a bit of an issue here where the FDA definition of serious adverse event that's on their website, which is what they should be following, is broader than the definition of serious adverse event that they used on the drug label, where they only looked at 6 specific categories of adverse events rather than everything. So that allowed underreporting of serious adverse events on the drug label itself. So then when we say, oh, well, actually it's higher because you left out all these other things, some people are saying, well, you're not making an apples to apples comparison. Well, yeah, we're not making an apples to apples comparison because the FDA didn't do what they should have done, or didn't require the manufacturer to do what they should have done in the first place in terms of counting all of these different types of adverse events.
Again, they just play by different rules with this when it comes. So, I think earlier this week, Center for Christian Virtue, we joined the chorus of organizations calling for mifepristone to just be completely pulled from shelves right now, because there's one other side of this, Jamie, that I think is important. This is the largest data set that's ever been used, but My understanding is the vast majority of abortions that use mifepristone aren't actually done through insurance. So these numbers, there's probably far greater numbers than what we even have here. Is that right?
That's right. Our data set includes roughly a quarter of all of the mifepristone abortions in the U.S. over this period. So any of the numbers that we say for the number of women who are affected by this ought to be probably in reality about 4 times the numbers that we're showing. So, for example, when we say that there were just over 3,000 cases where a woman took the pill, the abortion pill, and then was later diagnosed with an ectopic pregnancy, well, if that rate prevails throughout the country, even in the abortions that are not covered under the insurance, then that means there were probably about 12,000 cases in the U.S. over those 7 years where a woman took the abortion pill and then later found out she had an ectopic pregnancy.
And that's a big. I mean, this is one of the many reasons uh, why the in-person visits matter so much. Can you explain why it's so dangerous? I know you're not a doctor, you're a data analyst, but why is it so dangerous for women to take the abortion pill when they have an ectopic pregnancy? Why is it so important to figure out, is this an ectopic pregnancy before you give an abortion pill to a woman?
So an ectopic pregnancy, sometimes called a tubal pregnancy, it's when the tragically the fetus is not in the uterus, it's somewhere else, generally in a fallopian tube in the woman's body. There's no way that the baby can survive. And at that point, it's necessary for the woman to be diagnosed and to receive treatment to remove the ectopic pregnancy. In the case of mifepristone, right there on the label, from the very beginning, it has said that it's essential to rule out the possibility of an ectopic pregnancy prior to giving this pill to a woman, because the drug, the way that it acts within her body, can in some cases cause the ectopic pregnancy to rupture wherever it's located within her body, which can lead to all sorts of infection and other problems down the road. Potentially she can end up, being sterilized as a result of all this. So it's just a terrible situation. It needs to be screened for. It says right there on the label that it needs to be screened for from the beginning to make sure that you're not giving something to this woman that can cause even greater problems than the problem that she's already experiencing by having the ectopic pregnancy. Back when the abortion pill was first approved, one of the reasons for requiring the in-person visits was that there's not really a reliable way to check for ectopic pregnancy other than to give her an ultrasound and check to see where the baby is. The label never went so far from the beginning in saying, like, you absolutely have to do an ultrasound, which it probably should have. But at least she had to be there in the doctor's office. It was very likely that they were going to give her the ultrasound to check to see whether there's an ectopic pregnancy beforehand. It would be great if we could mandate that they use the ultrasound, of course, for the woman's health, to ensure that there is no ectopic pregnancy, to ensure that the baby's not so far along, because the farther along that she is, the greater the likelihood of complications from the pill. And of course, the best thing, as we know from requiring an ultrasound, is that some women are going to see their baby on the screen and they're going to say, I'm not going to do this. Like, that's my kid right there. So absolutely, if we could, ideally, we should go back to a situation where the woman's required to be there in a doctor's office, and hopefully required to have an ultrasound before there's any prescription for mifepristone.
Yeah, and Aaron, this is probably a spot where it's worth having at least a quick conversation again about when you're talking ectopic pregnancies and miscarriages, this is where the abortion industry loves to muddy the waters and say, like, these are all the same things. And if you can't treat one, then you can't treat the other. And we heard it all around issue 1 that we were limiting a woman's ability to have care for an ectopic pregnancy. Not the same thing by any stretch.
Oh yeah, I mean, we were talking about this before we started recording. Of the way the left attacks reports like this is, especially when they don't have any like reasonable arguments to make, they just make stuff up, right? Like, and honestly, they catch you off guard with it because it's so over the top. Again, the best example of this was during the abortion amendment fight here in Ohio, when all of a sudden they said the heartbeat bill wouldn't protect miscarriage care. And it honestly was the first time I'd ever even heard the term miscarriage care. Not because, women who have miscarriages don't need medical care or things like that, but that's never been debated, disputed, and it's always been understood. An abortion, the intentional taking of an unborn life, is very different than a miscarriage where the child, because of biological or other circumstances, does not unintentionally loses their life, right? And it's all the more egregious that they use things like ectopic pregnancies to try to justify their sort of radical life-taking agenda, because literally they're the ones that are trying to trying to give abortion pills to women who might have ectopic pregnancies, right? And there is no way, like you said, certainly not over telehealth, telemedicine, and not over the phone or not over a website. Is there any way for that doctor prescribing the abortion pill to know if that woman has an ectopic pregnancy? And I'll just say, especially if you've got kids in the car or kids listening, why don't you just press pause just for a minute? Because the reality when you talk to women in pregnancy centers, the horror stories of women getting these pills sent to them at home, and bleeding in their bathrooms, delivering children into toilets, and not knowing what to do, being completely alone, being lied to about what the pill actually does and what their situation actually is some of the worst things you can imagine. And it certainly is not caring for those women, for people who say they're all about women. It really is awful. So, Jamie, from our perspective, we want to see the FDA completely pull this pill. That's what our action alert is calling for. We're calling on our senators and congressmen and FDA Director McCarry and HHS Secretary Robert F. Kennedy to pull the pill while more research is done. But baseline, what does the FDA need to do in response to this from your perspective?
So I think obviously we'd like to see the pill off the market as well. The abortion pill is not safe for women. It's not clearly not safe for the babies. And we support protecting the lives of both the mothers and the babies. But in reality, in the short term, particularly given promises that President Trump made during the campaign, it's not likely that we're going to be able to achieve that. But he has promised to keep women safe. And it's clear that what's being done with the abortion pill right now is not keeping women safe. So we'd at least like to see the FDA reinstate the original safety protocols from 2000, which are much closer to the level of care that a woman would have received in one of those clinical trials that they were using to justify the pill being safe and effective. So if we could get back to that, we can at least protect women from the harm of the abortion pill. If we're requiring that the women actually have to go to a doctor in person in order to receive the pill, that's going to solve the problem of the telemedicine abortions, the out-of-state mailing of the pill into women. So the pro-life states basically right now, even if they're outlawing all abortions except those that are necessary to protect the life of the mother, right? Those states are still being inundated with pills sent from other places, like California, where there are effectively no restrictions on abortion. So we need to be able to require the woman to see the doctor in person in order to get the pill, both for her safety and to allow the much better pro-life laws that are on the books in more conservative states to have the effect that they should have in terms of saving babies' lives.
Yeah, and I think it's also worth pointing out here too that as you look at the graphs that are in the report, as far as chemical abortions, it's just straight up and to the right. Like this problem's only going to get worse as chemical abortions continue to increase. And I think you mentioned here that the Danco Laboratories, the manufacturer of mifepristone, more than 5 million women, according to their data, have used the pill since its approval in 2000. So this has just become it magnifies, the problem magnifies every year with this information.
Right. They're bragging on their website that more than 5 million women have used this. Well, have they looked at the safety data for these 5 million women? Because if they've actually looked at it, then they're going to see something much, much closer to what we see than to what the FDA is allowing them to claim on the label. So it would be great if we could find out what they've actually done with any of the information that they have. I can't believe that they don't know about this.
Well, and Jamie, obviously this data set that you guys pulled this report from, there's probably a lot more stories to tell from this. What's to come next from EPPC and this data on the pill and abortions?
Well, we have a whole series of reports lined up, not just from EPPC, but from other members of the coalition. If your listeners want to check out the website, it's stopharmingwomen.org. That's where EPPC, as well as these other organizations, will be posting all of our reports, where we look in more depth at exactly what kinds of harms women are experiencing under abortion, look more at the problem of the out-of-state shipment of the abortion pill, look at, on a state-by-state basis at the problems that we're seeing. We're going to be able to look at just so many different aspects of this and help to show the harm to women from the abortion pill.
Yeah, well, that's great stuff to know where to keep tabs on it. Stopharmingwomen.org. Just wanted to repeat that for our listeners out there if they missed it the first time. So, Jamie, this has been a eye-opening conversation. Thank you so much for your work on this report. Keep up the great work. We're excited to see more stuff from you and how we can expose some of the harms that are happening to women because of these chemical abortions. And we thank you so much for your time in joining us today on The Narrative. Thank you for tuning in to this episode of The Narrative, presented by CCV and produced by Wessler Media. If you found today's episode insightful, leave us a review or rating and subscribe anywhere you get your podcasts. We're your hosts, Mike Andrews, Aaron Baer, and David Mahan, and we'll see you next time on The Narrative.